Well, good morning again, and let me welcome you to our second service as well. And if you wouldn't mind standing together, we're going to be in the Gospel of Luke this morning, chapter 15. If you happen to need a Bible, the ushers are coming up the aisles. They have additional Bibles. And if by some chance you don't own a Bible and are unable to purchase one, we'd be more than happy to give you a very nice one-year Bible at no charge. We're going through the Gospel of Luke here on Sunday mornings, and Wednesday nights, by the way, we're in the New Testament epistles. We'll be in the book of Philippians again this Wednesday night, finishing up chapter 2. But Luke chapter 15, and let me just start by reading verse 1 to help give us a little context. It says in verse 1 of Luke 15, "Then all the tax collectors and the sinners drew near to him to hear him. And the Pharisees and scribes complained, saying, 'This man receives sinners and eats with them.'" And then where we left off last time in verse 8, "Or what woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls her friends together, saying, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found the piece which I lost.' Likewise, I say to you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." Then he said, "A certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me.' So he divided to them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his field to feed swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, Lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad. Your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. Let's pray. Father, many, many, many of us have been found. We also were dead. But Lord, you in your mercy have given us life. You who are rich in mercy, by your grace, Lord, you've saved us. And Father, we thank you for these beautiful parables. And we pray this morning that as we look at them, that the Holy Spirit of God would open our spiritual understanding. And Lord, you would minister to us personally, and you would reveal to each of us the way in which these things apply to our lives, our families, our friends, our parents, our children, our relatives, our co-workers, and to our own lives as well. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. You may be seated. When studying the Bible, context is it's just everything. It's the most important thing you can do to understand the context of something. So these parables, there's 3 of them. There's a reason why Jesus told these 3 stories. And the reason is found in chapter 15, verse 1. It says, "Then all the tax collectors and the sinners drew near to him to hear him, and the Pharisees and scribes complained, saying, 'This man receives sinners and eats with them.'" So there's 5 persons and 5 groups, if you will, that are mentioned here. First of all, the tax collectors and the sinners. What is said of them is that they drew near to Christ. They wanted to hear him. Tax collectors were the most corrupt, the most hated, vile people in all of Israel. They were Jews who had essentially sold their soul to the Roman government. They purchased the job of being a tax collector, and they had the authority of Rome behind them to receive taxes from the people. They also had the freedom to raise taxes or add taxes or make up a tax anytime they wanted. So they would do that, and they would then keep those additional taxes for themselves. And so they were rip-off artists, to say the least. And they were Jews, so they were hated by everybody. The word sinners is just a word that encompasses sinners. It includes all classes of sinners. And we're told that these tax collectors and these sinners drew near to Jesus. They came to him because they wanted to hear him. Interesting little side note to think about, and that is, why is it that these people who had more money than anyone else, and these sinners who did whatever it is they wanted to do, they were unrestrained in their activities, why is it that they would want to go to Jesus and listen to him? No doubt it's the same reason that people today who have lived for material possessions come to a point where they realize that materialism doesn't fill the emptiness within you. You could gain the whole world and lose your own soul. There's an empty spot in a person's life, regardless of how much they have or what their position is. Sinners who engage in all types of desires, they seek to fulfill the desires of their life. Those desires and the fulfillment of them are pleasurable for a season. But after a while, they're not pleasurable. So I think these 2 groups of people, just like people today, they realized, there's got to be something more to life than money and fast living, if you will. So they drew near to Jesus, and they wanted to hear him. And he was speaking to them, and he was teaching them. The other group, there's two other groups that were present, and that is the Pharisees and the scribes. Now, the Pharisees would be like your pastors today, the religious leaders today. The scribes were religious scholars or lawyers or students. They were the ones who would really go over the Old Testament in great, great detail and supply the Pharisees with all the studious work that they would do. Those two groups, the Pharisees and the scribes, you'll notice it says in verse 2, they complained. So you have Jesus, the tax collectors, the sinners, the Pharisees and the scribes, and the Pharisees and the scribes were complaining. They were murmuring. And the reason that they were complaining is found in the end of verse 2. It says, this man receives sinners and eats with them. So their complaint was twofold. This man, this Jesus, who, by the way, they were extremely envious of. We're told in the Gospels that it was envy that led them to actually initiate what wound up being the crucifixion of Christ. They were envious of the fact that they were losing their popularity and the crowds were going after Jesus Christ. This man, he receives or he welcomes sinners. They were complaining that he was associating with such sinful people. He receives them, he's associating with them, and he actually eats with them. Now that doesn't sound like a big deal to us, but to them in that culture, when you ate with someone, you were saying to them, I really want to express my friendship to you, my love for you, our fellowship. We take a piece of bread, a common piece of bread, we break it in half. I give you a piece of that loaf. I take a piece of that loaf, and that's a symbol of our oneness, of our unity together. So Jesus was associating himself with the worst of the worst and expressing his desire to be one with them. And this caused the Pharisees and the scribes to complain. So as a result of that, that's the context. As a result of that, what Jesus did, it says in verse 3, so he spoke this parable. And we read this parable of the lost sheep a couple of weeks ago. And in that parable and in the two that we're going to read today, there are several things that are common to all three of the parables. And it has to do with something being lost, something being found, and the joy that was associated with finding that which was lost. By the way, when something is lost, it cannot find itself. I know that to be true. I am the great loser. I never actually lose possession of things. I'm the great misplacer, I guess I should say. My wife is the great finder. She has a way to find anything that I've misplaced, and I'll speak more about that later. But I appreciate very much how I can look and look and look, I just can't find it. And I tell her, and she says, okay. And she looks, and do you know, it's always the last place she looks that she finds it. We say that, but it's not really true. But that's the context. So that's the setting. Try to imagine Jesus. We don't know how many tax collectors were there. Maybe several dozen, maybe just 5. How many sinners? Maybe 5, maybe several dozen. Could have been a group of 15 altogether, 20, 30, 40 people. But here's Jesus, and it's clear that he's talking to them. They're listening to him, and he's very friendly towards them, and they're very attentive. And then standing outside there are these religious leaders with their arms folded, perhaps just murmuring and complaining and speaking to one another, saying, this man, look at him. He actually receives sinners. Can you imagine? Not only does he receive them, but he eats with them on top of that. They were condemning him. So he told 3 stories. The first one starts in verse 8. It's a short one. Or what woman, verse 8, having 10 silver coins, if she loses 1 coin, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? It was a question. And when she has found it, she calls her friends and neighbors together, saying, rejoice with me, for I have found the piece which I lost. Likewise, I say to you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. The text doesn't indicate it to us, but it was common in that culture for a woman to have a piece of jewelry that included 10 coins. It was very important, an important piece of jewelry, and if you were missing a coin, it would look very odd, it would be very embarrassing. So when this woman, he's saying, which woman among you, if she lost a coin, wouldn't first of all light a lamp, no electricity, light a lamp, and then sweep through the house, looking very carefully for the lost coin until she found it? Well, every woman who had lost a coin would do that. And then when she's found it, what she would do is she would call her friends and neighbors together, saying, I want you to rejoice with me, for I found the piece which I lost. So everybody would know, oh, that poor lady, she lost her coin, and she's over there looking for it. And then when she found it, after however long it took, she would call everybody, say, oh, hey, come here, I found it. Let's rejoice together. And everybody would be so happy because that which was lost has now been found. And then Jesus says in verse 10, likewise, or in similar manner, I say to you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Now, Jesus believed in heaven. Jesus believed in angels. Jesus believed in God. Jesus believed in repentance. Jesus believed in salvation. And what he says here is, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Jesus also believes there's something in the presence of the angels of God. Now, if you read this very carefully, it doesn't say that the angels are rejoicing, though it doesn't say they're not. But what it does say is that in the presence of the angels, there's joy. Let me ask you this question. What is in the presence of the angels? Well, the Father is in the presence of the angels, right? The Son is in the presence of the angels. The Holy Spirit is in the presence of the angels. The seraphim, those special angelic beings around the throne, they're in the presence of the angels. What else is in the presence of the angels? Well, there's a sea of glass, and who's on that sea of glass? There are the multitudes of those who've been redeemed. So in heaven, there's apparently implied here that heaven knows when one sinner repents. Somehow there's communication. The word gets up to heaven. Hey, guess what? Somebody repented. And the reaction in heaven is one of joy. I don't know whether it's because heaven can see what's going on, or whether somehow God informs those in heaven. Guess what? Somebody repented, but they rejoice when a person down here is affected by the goodness of God, which leads them to repentance, and they rejoice. Now, why do you think they rejoice? Why do you think the people in heaven, along with the Father, the Son, and no doubt the angels, why do you think they're rejoicing? Well, it's pretty simple. I think it's because they know that person is now just changed their eternal destiny. They were on their way to the lake of fire, but by the grace of God, they've repented, they've turned to Christ, they've put their faith in Christ, they've been saved, and they're going to wind up where we are one day. There's no better place to be. Here's another question. How many people per day, per hour, let's say, globally, do you think are repenting and coming to Christ? I mean, it's probably something we've never thought about. How many people repent every hour around the world, get saved? Could be hundreds, could be thousands every hour. There's billions of people around the world. There's active Christian witnessing and ministry taking place, calling people to Christ right here this morning in this room. So people are repenting, they're coming to Christ. Heaven has got to be a continual place of extreme joy. What joy awaits you and I in heaven? And what joy took place the day that you repented and got saved? You see, these Pharisees and these scribes were complaining. Jesus is trying to explain to them, God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that through him the world might be saved. Jesus didn't come to find the righteous, but he came to find the unrighteous. He came to save that which was lost. He tells another story. It starts there in verse 11. It's called often the parable of the prodigal son. The word prodigal, by the way, means extravagant giving. And it can have a negative connotation, and it does in this case, of wastefulness, but it really means extravagance. It could honestly be called the parable of the extravagant father. Because as we get to the end of the story, we see how extravagant this father was to the son who had sinned. And when we think of our Father in heaven, how extravagant, how generous, how giving has he been to you? You, a sinner, me, a sinner, who've come to him. What has he given to us? He certainly hasn't given condemnation. He certainly hasn't punished us for our sins. He's been gracious, he's been merciful, and he's been gracious to us. It's often called the parable of the lost son as well. Then he said, a certain man had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So he divided to them his livelihood. Now, in that day, like today, parents would store up an inheritance, and when they either retired or died, or could even ahead of retirement, could make the decision to give to their children their inheritance. It was considered highly inappropriate, very disrespectful to ask your father for your portion of the inheritance without him initiating it. But he said, Father, I want my portion, which because there were only 2 sons and he was the younger, he would have only gotten a third. And the father was very compliant with him. He said, okay, you can have what belongs to you. In verse 13, not many days after, it took the boy a few days to get everything together. He gathered all together and he journeyed to a far country. He went a long way from his home. Couldn't wait to get away. And when he got there, he wasted his possessions with prodigal or extravagant living. He took that inheritance, went as far as he could, and he just wasted all of it. Verse 14 says, but when he had spent all, he's now out of money. To his surprise, there arose a severe famine in the land, and he began to be in want. So he hadn't anticipated 2 things. He hadn't anticipated running out of money, which he did, and he hadn't anticipated this severe famine. And he hadn't anticipated him now being in want. He went from being at the top, having a lot of wealth and money, now having no money and no food. What he did in verse 15 is he went and he joined himself to a citizen of that country, and that citizen, that owner, sent him into his fields to feed swine. He went and he got a job feeding pigs. He was so hungry in verse 16 that he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. There were managers, there were supervisors, men in the field watching the supply of food for the pigs, watching over the workers, and the workers would go and obtain the food, and they would distribute it to the pigs, and they kept a close eye on the food. He just wanted to take a little bit of pig food and have some, and he wished that somebody would give him a little pig food to eat. He would have been happy to eat that. When you get that hungry, you're happy to eat anything. Now, everything changes in verse 17. And in verse 17, we begin to get an idea on the inside. We've only been listening to him and watching his story, but in verse 17, we're now brought inside of his mind and his heart. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? Here's what I'll do. This is my plan. I will arise and go to my father and will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.'" So when he came to himself, what does it mean? Well, it means that he finally woke up. He finally realized just exactly what he had done. He finally came to his senses. You know, sin has a way of deceiving us and making us act as if we have no sense. In fact, a lot of times we'll say, "That's nonsense." Nonsense. There's no sense there. You're acting in a nonsensical way. You're not acting properly. You've lost your sensibilities. Thank God we can come back to our senses. God allowed this young man, to come back to his senses. He finally, you can imagine, he's there feeding pigs and he's eyeballing their food. He's starving. He gets a little bit of something. But the pain, the problem he was in, which he had created, God used that to help bring him around to his senses. Now, possibly some of you are like this young man. You've gone off and you've lived a life of waste. You've wasted what you've had. And surprising things have happened to you that you hadn't scheduled in. You hadn't written it into the script. And you find yourself now in a position where you wish you weren't in that position. You'd give anything to be out of that position. And you realize that you caused this to happen. And you may be in the position now where you're finally coming to your senses. You're realizing, what have I done? Look what I've done to myself. Well, if you're in that position, thank God. You now have some sense. You're no longer in nonsense. You're coming to your senses. Thank God that He's brought you to that place. And that's what God does when He saves somebody. He opens their eyes to the truth. God was opening this young man's eyes. He began to realize, he said, back home my father's hired servants, they're not even members of the family, they have bread enough to eat. They not only have enough to eat, they have enough to spare. They could give food away, and I'm perishing with hunger. If this stays up, if I keep going, I'm going to die. So he concocted a plan, and he put a little speech together. There in verse 18 and 19, he said, here's my plan. I'm going to get up. I'm going to leave where I am, this far country. I'm going to go back to my father, and I'm going to tell him a couple of things. I'm going to tell him, number one, Father. I'm going to call him by his proper title, Father, and then I'm going to admit two things. I have sinned against heaven and before you. So he saw the bigger picture. What he had done was not right. I've sinned against heaven, but I've also sinned against you. Sinning means to break what's the right thing, to violate the law of God. I'm going to admit my sin. So he arose, he put his plan into action, and he came to his father. And I might say to some of you, if you're in the position, you've come to your senses, and you have a plan, God's been giving you a plan of what you should do, well, go ahead and do it. Don't wait. Go ahead and put your plan into operation. He arose the next day or whatever, he arose, and he came to his father. He made a beeline for home. Now the story switches in verse 20, and it focuses now on his father. It says, but when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. Now that little expression there, when he was still a great way off, means, and when it says, and his father saw him, it means that the father would have had to leave his property and go quite a distance from his property to have a vantage point to be able to see whoever it is that might be coming, be it animal or human being. And scholars believe that the father on a daily basis would go out for some period of time way far away from his home, just looking and just hoping, maybe today my boy who is dead is going to come home. So his father, while he was still a great way off, his father saw him. You know how you can tell who someone is even when they're a great way off by the way that they walk. You go, oh, that's so-and-so. You just know by the way they walk, even though you've not spent hours examining how they walk. It's just there in your mind. You can tell by their gait. So it says that his father saw him, and then we're told, and he had compassion, or he had mercy. He felt pain within his heart for his son. If you are a long way off from God, and you are coming back to God, I want you to know God has been looking for you. God has been waiting for you. And God does not have, it doesn't say when he saw him he had condemnation like, man, I'm going to really have a talk with that boy. Oh, no. He had compassion upon him. God has compassion upon you. The next thing that we're told is that he ran. Now I have to tell you, in that culture, older men, it was considered not illegal, but it was undignified for older men to run. It was kind of a civil, social norm. Old men don't run. Why would that be? Well, let's demonstrate. Let's get an old man, first of all. Any takers? Let's have you run up and down the deal here. Well, if you were to take a young man, boy, they're like rabbits. They can just go. Old men used to be like rabbits, but when they get older, it's not pretty. They run, they got all the gumption inside, but their body just won't work properly. That didn't bother the Father. He wasn't concerned about who might have saw, look at that old guy running down there. He was running with his heart. He had compassion. He understood the mistake his son had made. He ran to him. And when he got to him, he fell on his neck, which means he hugged him. Pause for a moment with me, please. What had the boy been doing as a job? Feeding pigs? Do you think he had the chance for a hot shower? Picked up his clothes at the laundromat? You think he had just gotten a haircut and everything was all poofed up? No. Do you think he had cologne on? No. You get the picture. He didn't smell too good, didn't look too good. You know, a lot of times people think before they can come back to God, they have to do what with themselves? They have to clean themselves up, right? A lot of times people, why don't you come to Christ? Well, you know, there's some things I need to clean up in my life, first of all. Oh, no. It's God who cleans you up. You see, God receives you just the way you are. He'll receive you just the way you are today. He ran and he fell on his neck, which means he hugged him. And he kissed him, and literally it means he smothered him with kisses. He must have just kissed him, his forehead, his cheeks, his sides, his lips, just hugged him, kissed him, and just over and over and over and over, he was so happy. Well, the son went ahead and gave his little speech there in verse 21. Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. He was very honest. He realized what he had done, and he was very humble. He said, I'm not even worthy to be called your son. Now back to the father in verse 22. But the father, he now turns, and they've apparently walked from that great distance. They've walked back to the property. But his father now said to the servants, bring out the best robe, put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again, and he was lost and is found, and they began to be merry. Now, the significance of the robe, the ring, and the sandals and the calf. Servants didn't wear shoes. Only family members wore shoes or sandals. So he was saying to him, in opposition, the boy said, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. The father said, oh, no, you're mistaken. You are my son, and I'm putting some shoes on you. You belong to me. You're my child. The ring was the family signet ring. It was your mark of identification. The robe was also part of your identification, and you're part of this family, and it was for celebratory, happy occasions. In other words, restoration was taking place. Reconciliation was taking place. You know, the father had been waiting, but to be reconciled to God, the one who's gone away has to come back. You see, God's waiting for you if you've gone away. All you need to do is come around to him. He'll reinstate you. The fatted calf was, again, celebration. And in the Father's own words, he says, for this my son, my own son, he was dead, or he was separated from me. and is alive again. He's come back. You know, when you go away from God, you separate yourself from Him. You lose communication with Him. You stop listening to Him. You stop talking to Him. You're still His son, but you're dead in a sense to Him. But when you come back, life returns to your soul. And the Father was so happy. And they all began to be merry. They all began to be happy. Now, in verse 25, the story changes again. It's now the other and only older son. He's still out working in the field while all this is going on. And as he came and drew near to the house, maybe at day's end, he heard music and dancing, which of course was unusual. So he called one of the servants and asked him, "What's going on here?" And he said to him, "Your brother has come." And because he, referring to the father, because he has received him safe and sound. Your father has killed the fatted calf. I love those words, safe and sound. We use that terminology, don't we? Safe and sound. We like to say, well, everything it's safe and it's sound. It's all okay. Your brother is back, he's saying. We're celebrating his safe return. You know, one of the things that is such a heartbreak to parents about their prodigal children is their concern for their children's physical well-being and their life. They worry. They worry that their children may get hurt. They worry that their children may perish. And what a joy it is when a child comes home safe and sound. No greater peace. Some of you parents, some of us parents, understand those words deeply. May I encourage you, keep praying for your children. Don't give up. You keep praying for them. You pray that they'll come to their senses. Don't give up praying. Well, the servant told the son what had happened, verse 28, but he was angry. Everybody else was happy, but he was angry and he would not go in. He just stood outside while everybody's inside happy, rejoicing, eating, and so on. He would not go in. Notice what happened in the last part of verse 28. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So word got to the father, hey, your other son's outside. He's angry. He won't come in. So the father went outside to greet him and he pleaded with him. We're not told all of the words he said, but what we are told in verse 29 is what the boy said to his father. He answered and said to his father, "Lo, these many years I've been serving you." Could have been 20, 30 years. I've never transgressed. I've never broken your law or insulted you, your commandments at any time. He'd been a good son, a good boy. And yet you never gave me a young goat. You've never had a big party for me that I might make merry with my friends. I'm not being rewarded. Look, what I've not done anything wrong. And you've never celebrated my not doing anything wrong. But as soon as this son of yours, and I'm sure that's how he said it, as soon as this son of yours, he couldn't even call him by his name. We talk about dysfunctional families. Listen, the world is dysfunctional. Give me a break. Who isn't dysfunctional? Sin brought dysfunction into the world. In families, sometimes family members will not address family members by their proper title. They'll refer to them as it, or call their parents by their first name instead of mom or dad. It's tragic what sin can do. Well, the Father answers the Son, and he seeks to instruct him in verse 31 and 32. Now let me ask you this. Are you someone who's open to being instructed by God? Maybe you are angry about something. Things are not going the way you wanted them to go. You're surprised at what's happened. Are you in a place where God can instruct you? Or are you so deep into your anger that you won't listen? Or maybe you are in a place where you will listen. I know this. God wants you to be able to listen, and he sure will tell you if you'll listen. So the Father sought to instruct the Son, and he said to him, first of all, he called him Son. Didn't yell at him, didn't call him any expletives. He said, Son. And you can just imagine the tone of compassion and so on. He understood not only the mistake of his young son, but he understood the mistake of his older son as well. That's one of the things that I'm told age will bring you, is some wisdom. You got that, didn't you? Son, you are always with me, and all I have is yours. He was affirming to him, you're always with me. I love you. Everything I have left, it belongs to you. Isn't that beautiful? That's how God views you. You're always with him. Everything he has, he's made you a joint heir. It was right that we should make merry. Now he's beginning to instruct and correct the son. The son was wrong for his attitude, just like those Pharisees and scribes were wrong, and that's why he told these parables. He said, it was right that we should make merry and be glad. We ought to be happy about this. For your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. He was correcting him. He was instructing him. Here is the Father instructing the Son, bringing some correction to him. And of course, all this was for the benefit of the Pharisees and the scribes because of their complaining and their view. And let me just, before we talk about the Father and the Son and the instruction, let me just mention, why would people complain and murmur about Jesus receiving sinners? It has to do with self-righteousness. They were self-righteous. And it had to do with pride. It had to do with envy. Those are terrible things. Self-righteousness, pride, and envy, so I'm told. I know they are. They can blind us from the grace of God. These people in the church, this can take place. That's why James says, look, when rich people come to your church and poor people come to your church, don't be a respecter of persons. Don't say to the rich person, oh, why don't you sit up here in this very special place? But for the poor person, you just sit in the back somewhere. Don't do that. You treat everybody the same. That, by the way, off the subject, was one of the first blessings in my life over 41, almost 42 years ago. That was one of the first things I realized about God, and that was that God loved me as much as He loved anybody else, and I couldn't get over it. I said, are you sure? Are you sure about this? I was so happy, and still am. How does our Father instruct us? Well, we have a relationship with Him, and if we will take the time to relate to Him and have intimacy with our Father, He can instruct us, and He can guide us, and He can teach us. You know, when people come in for counseling, one of the first things that ought to be asked of people when they have a need is this: how is your devotional life? Tell me about your devotional life. Do you read the Bible? Are you in communication with God? Is He speaking to you? You see, that's why you were created, to have a relationship with Him. And if you're away from Him, He's looking for you. I would encourage you, become a man or a woman of God who spends time with God regularly. Get yourself a Bible that you can understand. Get a couple of little devotional books that are written by people who have been down the road a bit. And those, you know, you remember those old water pumps that you'd have to push the thing a lot, and finally the water would come out. What do you call those? Water pumps? I don't know. But I remember them. You know, just go, and then eventually a little water would come out. You know, what you can do every day is stack up a few little devotionals, get yourself a pen, and begin to immerse yourself in the Word of God and in the things of God. Feed yourself daily. You know, Philip quoted those two verses. Physical exercise is great. It's profitable for but godliness is profitable for the life that now is and for the life that is to come. If you go to the gym one day, it's not going to make much difference. If you go 2 days, it's not going to make much difference. If you keep going and keep eating properly, after a while, we're going to call you Arnold Schwarzenegger. But it takes time, doesn't it? Same thing spiritually. You can't just come to church and like the message and read the Bible one day and think, okay, and then that's not going to do it. It's a daily walk with the Lord. You need to learn how to just feed yourself, immerse yourself, start packing it in. Learning. Take a pen, write down when you're reading a little devotional and it says something like, blessed are those that wait upon the Lord. Write down, yes, Lord, thank you. Help me to wait on you, whatever it is. When we sing these beautiful songs, I sit here and I read these words. You ought to be able to associate the principles being sung about with Bible verses. Maybe you even know where the verses are, or Bible principles. You ought to be able to say, oh yeah, that's Hebrews 12. Oh yeah, that's John 1. Oh, that's 1 John chapter 1, verse 9. That's Ephesians chapter 2. You should be able to fellowship with God through these songs Because the Word of God is in you. You'll never, ever, ever grow unless you apply yourself to the Word of God. Are you teachable? Or are you going to remain in the state that you're in? You're angry. You're upset. Things didn't go the way you wanted. And you've gotten a raw deal. And God's trying to talk to you. And He's saying, if you'll just let me, I'll straighten it all out for you. Because that's what this father did with this boy. Now, we don't know what happened to this older son. I hope he took his father's advice. Will you? I hope I'll take my father's advice. You're saying, yeah, we hope so too, Pastor Bob. You bet. We're in a family together. This coming Saturday, we have the second of 4 studies I'm doing. We just did one yesterday. These are very, very wonderful. And next Saturday, it's what the Bible says about eternal security. Don't jump to all kinds of conclusions with those controversial words, but the little one-page bit of notes and study guide is available in the foyer, and you can pick it up. And then Saturday at 10 o'clock, 10 to 11:30, we'll go over that subject. And then we're going to deal on the third week with what does the Bible say about baptism. You know, these are things that you should be able to readily know, articulate, and explain to anybody that asks you. Baptism, by the way, is so important that it was one of the last words that Jesus gave before He went to heaven. He talked about water baptism. And then what about the power of prayer? Jesus talked about that. In fact, Pastor Mike quoted 2 verses where Jesus said, watch and pray. So we want to help you to grow and to become established in these matters. And in just a moment, we're going to have the ushers come up and receive the tithes and the offerings.